The Blue Jay Cafe has always been a special place for Virginia and me. For 40 years now, every Tuesday, we'd met there for lunch, a tradition unbroken by weather, health problems, or family obligations. Only today I was 20 minutes late, which in itself was an extraordinary event. I'm sorry, Virginia. I sank heavily into the chair across from my friend. Brian dropped by unannounced, and I couldn't let him out. Virginia nodded understandingly and gestured to the waitress. We both always ordered the same thing: apple pie and coffee for me, blueberry pancakes with maple syrup, and tea for her. "And how's your son doing?" she asked when the waitress left. I caught that peculiar tone in her voice, the one I'd gotten whenever she talked about Brian, or even more so about his wife. Skepticism spiced with concern for me. In our 45 years of friendship, we'd learned to read each other like an open book. "The usual," I shrugged, stirring sugar into my coffee. He stopped by to make sure I was taking my meds, making sure I had enough groceries, and to fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom. "Which he's been doing for 2 months now," Virginia said, raising an eyebrow. "Third," I corrected. "But he's very busy at work, you know. Financial analysis requires total focus." Virginia snorted. "Irma Hollis, stop making excuses for your son. At 72, you're still clinging to the image of the perfect mother. When was the last time you were at their house for dinner?" I wondered. "Really? When?" "Brian used to invite me over every Sunday, but gradually that tradition waned. First, my visits became monthly, then occasional, and then reduced to rare holidays where I felt inappropriate and superfluous. Wendy's birthday in April? I finally remembered. Almost 5 months ago. "Irma, do you realize what's going on? Wendy is systematically alienating your son from you. I don't understand why you put up with it." Virginia's always been straightforward. It was a trait that sometimes irritated me when I was young. But over the years, I've learned to appreciate that kind of blunt honesty, especially now when my life was entangled in a thin web of innuendo and fake caring. "Brian's happy," I said, looking away. "Or at least that's what he says. And Wendy? She just really likes order and control. I guess I don't fit her idea of the perfect family." "Your house doesn't fit," Virginia said with sudden harshness. "Can't you see that she's been after your real estate since the first day she met you?" I sighed. Yes, Wendy had always been interested in my house, a Victorian structure on Maple Street, one of the prettiest and oldest streets in Lebanon. My late husband, Henry, bought it back in the 70s, when houses like this were affordable for middle-class families. Now real estate prices in our neighborhood have skyrocketed, and my modest two-story house with a garden has become a hotspot for investors and realtors. Wendy often talks about the importance of keeping the house in the family, I admitted, but maybe she just cared about Brian's inheritance. "Of course she did." Virginia rolled her eyes. "Especially after she encouraged you to rewrite your will 5 years ago. Remember that conversation? Irma, at your age, it's so important to have all your paperwork in order. Like you were 90 instead of 67. I remembered. Wendy had then brought the contacts of a very good lawyer who would advise me absolutely free on inheritance matters. But I never took advantage of that offer. Henry had taught me never to rush into important decisions, especially those involving money or property. "And do you remember when she offered to move in with them after your flu last winter?" Virginia continued. "Then you refused, and suddenly Brian started showing up at your place 3 times a week to keep an eye on you. Since then, he's been endlessly checking on your health, your home, your ability to live on your own. Don't you see it as a system?" I frowned. Yes, Brian had started visiting me more often since that flu, but was it wrong for a son to be concerned about his mother's health? As I scrolled through those visits in my mind, however, I was beginning to notice oddities. Brian always came with his cell phone at the ready, as if documenting the state of the house, taking pictures of a leaky faucet, looking in the refrigerator, checking the medications in the medicine cabinet. And every time he left, Wendy would call with helpful advice. Maybe you're right. I sipped my coffee, feeling the bitterness of the drink correlate with the bitterness of the realization. But what to do? Brian is my only son. I can't just cut him out of my life. Virginia covered my hand with hers, wrinkled with protruding veins, but still strong, like her character. Irma, listen to me. You and I are not getting any younger. I buried my husband 20 years before you, and believe me, I've learned over the years that at our age, we can't let anyone, not our children, not our grandchildren, not society, dictate how we live our lives, or, more importantly, where we should live. Her friend's gaze became sharp, piercing. How has Brian changed since the wedding? Be honest. That question got me thinking. Brian was always a sensitive, gentle boy. Henry sometimes lamented his indecisiveness, but I saw it as a tendency to compromise. After Henry's death 7 years ago, Brian took touching care of me, calling daily, helping with paperwork, insurance, banking issues. And then, 2 years into my widowhood, Wendy came into his life. Nothing much at first, I said slowly. He seemed happy, in love. Wendy was so energetic, so determined. I was even glad that she balanced his indecision. I fell silent, remembering how truly happy I was for my son. I was impressed that Wendy worked at a prestigious law firm, that she had clear plans for her life. Plus, Brian was already 42, and I was starting to worry that he'd never get married. And then he started canceling our traditional Saturday lunches, I continued. Seldom at first, then more and more often. Wendy had migraines. Then their house was constantly being remodeled. Then they had new friends with kids to keep in touch with. And then he stopped calling at all and started coming by himself, but less and less often. And his opinion? Had it changed? Virginia insisted. I shook my head. Rather, it just gone. We used to be able to argue for hours about politics or books. Henry always said he'd never seen such a stubborn arguer as our son. Now, whenever I have an opinion that differs from Wendy's, Brian changes the subject or looks at his phone. The waitress brought our order, and we ate in silence for a few minutes. The apple pie was excellent, as always, but for some reason, I could barely taste it. You know what strikes me most about this story? Virginia suddenly asked. How easily Wendy managed to drive a wedge between you and your son in just 5 years, and you were the center of the universe for him all his childhood. I remember Henry being jealous sometimes because Brian was so attached to you. That was true. Brian was a real mama's boy, as Henry used to tease him. When he was a kid, he'd even sleep with my shirt on when I was away on business. He missed me so much. Wendy's smart, I sighed, and very persistent. I think she's flattered to have control over someone else's life. Brian was an easy target. He was always looking for approval and guidance. First from Henry and me, now from her. And you've been her target too, Irma. The words sent a chill down my spine. Is it really that bad? What do you mean? Virginia pushed her empty plate away and leaned closer. Over the past 5 years, Wendy has taken possession of your son, isolated you from his family, and systematically set him up to think you're incapable of living on your own. Why? I can think of only one reason. Your house. You think she's gonna convince you to move in with them or into a nursing home to take over the property? Absolutely. I opened my mouth to object, but I couldn't. The events of the last few years pieced together to form a frighteningly clear picture. Wendy had actually once shown me brochures of a great place for seniors, a nursing home with 24-hour care. Just to make you aware of the possibilities, Irma, she said then. I politely thanked her and forgot about it. But now, what would Henry say? I muttered. He'd kick your son's ass for letting his wife treat you like that, Virginia snorted. I smiled involuntarily, imagining the scene. Henry was a gentleman, but when it came to protecting his family, he was relentless. He had once severed relations with his brother after learning that he had cheated me out of a business deal. No one has the right to take advantage of my family, he declared at the time. That uncompromising attitude was one of the many traits I loved him for. You're right, I nodded. Henry wouldn't have tolerated that attitude, especially after all we'd invested in Brian. Remember how we'd saved money on everything to send him to college? I bet you do, Virginia exclaimed. You denied yourself everything so that your boy could get the best education, and how many sleepless nights you spent editing his term papers. If it weren't for you, he would never have gotten that job at the finance company. Yes, I helped Brian with his studies, reading, writing essays, even math when he was younger. I always made time, even when I was running my little bookstore. I remember Henry joking that I should demand to co-author my son's thesis. Now I was just a burden that Wendy was methodically getting rid of. You know, I sipped my coffee as it cooled. Sometimes I think I'd rather Brian hadn't gotten married at all than have chosen a woman like that. It's a terrible thought for a mother, I know. Not for a mother, but for a friend, Virginia corrected. Because a good parent wants to see their child happy and a decent person. And Wendy makes Brian neither. I've never looked at it that way. Is Brian happy with Wendy? He looks exhausted, perpetually tense, as if he expects to be criticized for the slightest slip-up. And when I ask him about his life, he responds with the standard phrases, everything's great, work is going well, we're thinking of remodeling the kitchen. What should I do, Virginia? I asked, feeling suddenly tired. If Wendy has really turned her son against me for the house, how can I change that? My friend looked at me with unexpected firmness. You have to protect yourself, Irma. Not your house, yourself. Think about what you want, not what Brian or Wendy expects of you. You've lived 72 years, 35 of them devoted to your son, 43 to your husband. Maybe it's time to live for yourself. I've never thought about it. All my life, I've been someone's daughter, wife, mother. My bookstore was more of a hobby than a real business, and even that I sold when Henry got sick to take care of him. And now, at 72, what does it mean to live for yourself? I don't know where to start, I admitted. Small things, Virginia smiled. For example, invite me to dinner on Friday. It's been so long since we've had our bachelorette parties with wine and old movies. I shuddered. Friday is when Brian usually stops by to check on the house. Exactly. Virginia's eyes sparkled with challenge. Let this be your first little act of independence. Tell him you have other plans. See how Wendy reacts when her visitation schedule is disrupted. It seemed like such a small step, but for some reason the thought of it filled me with a strange excitement. Saying no to my son? Is it really that hard? And yet I knew it would be the first pebble that would move the avalanche of change for me. Okay, I nodded decisively. Come over Friday at 6. I'll make that apple pie Henry loved so much. And I'll bring a nice bottle of wine, Virginia said with a wink. And, Irma, Henry would be proud of you. He always said you had more strength in you than you realize. I smiled through sudden tears. Yes, Henry used to say that phrase a lot, especially when I doubted myself. You have so much strength in you, Irma, he'd say. You just don't know it yet. Maybe it was time to find out. Friday night with Virginia was just what I needed. We watched an old Katharine Hepburn movie, drank wine, and laughed about stories from our youth. For the first time in a long time, I didn't think about Brian and Wendy, Didn't worry about what I'd say to my son when he called and asked why I'd canceled his weekly visit. He called, of course, 3 times, and each time I simply didn't pick up the phone, enjoying the unfamiliar feeling of freedom. Saturday morning, Brian arrived unannounced. His face expressed a mixture of annoyance and concern when I opened the door in my favorite robe and with a cup of coffee in my hand. "Mom, why didn't you answer the phone?" Wendy and I were worried. I smiled, letting him into the house. "I'm sorry, honey. I had Virginia over and we were watching movies. I turned off the sound on my phone. At your age, it's dangerous not to answer the phone." He frowned, walking into the living room and looking around as if searching for signs of neglect or decay. What if something had happened? I had a friend with me, Brian. I'm not alone in this world. He threw me a strange look that I would have interpreted earlier as a son's concern for his mother. But after talking to Virginia, I saw something else in him. Annoyance that his plans had been disrupted, that I'd shown independence. "Wendy wanted me to check your blood pressure and glucometer," he said, pulling a blood pressure monitor out of his pocket. "You have a doctor's appointment next week, right?" "Tuesday," I confirmed as I obediently rolled up the sleeve of my robe. "But my blood pressure's perfectly fine. It's better to be safe." He buttoned the cuff on my arm and pressed a button. As the machine worked, I looked at my son. He was 47, but in recent years, he had begun to look older than his years. The bald spots on his forehead were more noticeable, the wrinkles around his eyes deeper. I often noticed the way he frowned when he was on the phone with his wife, the way his jaw tensed. Brian had once been a smiling, carefree young man. What had happened to him? 130/80, he announced, looking at the display. "A little elevated, Mom. Are you taking your pills?" Every morning, I gently removed his hand and stood up. "Would you like some coffee?" I was just about to make a fresh one. "No, I can't stay late. Wendy's waiting for me. We're on our way to look at houses." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "You're moving?" "No," he seemed embarrassed. "Just, looking at options. There are some great schools in our neighborhood." "Schools?" I questioned him. "Brian, are you and Wendy planning a baby?" That was unexpected. In 5 years of marriage, the subject of children had never come up. Wendy, as far as I knew, was completely focused on her career and had no interest in motherhood. My son blushed and looked away. "No, not really. It's just that houses in good school districts are a good investment for the future." Something in his voice made me wary. He sounded uncertain, almost guilty. Brian had never been a convincing liar, a trait he hadn't inherited from me. "Of course, darling." I didn't insist. "Say hi to Wendy." As he was leaving, he turned around. "By the way, Mom, we won't be able to come over next Friday. Wendy has an important meeting at the office, and I have to support her, but I'll stop by on Sunday, okay?" "Sure," I repeated, smiling. "Don't worry about me. I have a lot to do." After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, watching his silver sedan pull out of the yard, looking at houses in good school districts. It didn't make sense. Wendy had told me recently that they'd invested a significant amount of money in renovating their house, a new kitchen, updated bathrooms. Why move after barely finishing the renovations? I walked to the bedroom and, after hesitating for a moment, dialed Virginia's number. "You're not going to believe this," I said when she answered. "Brian was just here and said he and Wendy are looking at new houses in neighborhoods with good schools. He's obviously not telling me something." "No wonder," Virginia snorted. "I bet they're looking at places for you, too. I bet Wendy's already picked out a nice retirement home in the neighborhood." Her words sounded cynical, but I couldn't help thinking there was some truth to them. At breakfast, I decided to stop by Brian's house, ostensibly to drop off his favorite cookies, but really to see if they were serious about moving. I was ashamed of this little lie and my desire to spy on my own son, but something inside me insisted that I had to find out the truth. By noon, I was already parked outside their neat house in the suburb of Lebanon. Brian's car was out of sight, but Wendy's minivan was in the driveway. Normally, I would have called ahead of time, but today I decided to surprise him. I rang the doorbell, nervously clutching the cookie container. No one answered. I rang again, then walked around the house, heading for the backyard. Maybe Wendy's in the garden? As I passed the ajar kitchen window, I heard voices. Wendy was on the phone, apparently talking to Brian. "No, you don't understand," she said with pressure. "We need a bigger house now. If we wait until your mother can finally live on her own, prices will skyrocket." I froze, unable to move. "Yes, I know she's doing fine now," Wendy continued, irritation in her voice. "But she's 72, Brian. How much longer do you think she'll be on her own? A year? Two? And then what? Do you really want her to live with us? Share our bedroom? Ruin our love life?" Pause. Apparently, Brian was answering something. "Look, Sunny Acres Nursing Home is a great option. They accept seniors who need minimal care. Your mom will be safe, under the care of nurses, and we can sell her house and get enough to pay for her stay for years to come. The rest of the money goes towards a down payment on a new house for us. It's a win-win for everyone." I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. They were really planning to sell my house to finance their new life and put me in a nursing home, without my knowledge, without my consent. "No, she won't agree right away." Wendy's voice grew colder. "But I've prepared the ground. Have you seen how I keep reminding her of her age, of the risks of living alone? She's already starting to doubt her own abilities. After her last flu, I even hinted that she could stay with us, and you should have seen the terror in her eyes. The suggestion of moving to a place where strangers would take care of her would seem like the lesser of evils to her." New pause. "Brian, I'm doing this for you too. You see how she's getting older. Sooner or later, you're going to have to make a tough decision. Isn't it better to make it now, when we still have a chance to build our own lives? Besides, it's an inheritance. You'll still have the house when she dies. We're just, we're speeding things up. For her sake." I felt nauseous. I backed away from the window, trying not to make any noise, and walked quickly to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. All the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Not so much on Wendy's part. Her true attitude toward me hadn't been a secret for a long time. But on my son's. Brian, my only child, the man Henry and I had given up everything for, had tacitly supported the plan. A plan that would rob me of my home, my independence, my dignity. At home, the first thing I did was call Virginia and, panting with excitement, recounted everything I'd heard. Her response was immediate. "You have to sell the house. Now." "What? Sell the house, Irma?" Virginia's voice was ringing with steel. "Before they could put their plan into action. Sell it yourself, on your own terms, and use the money to secure your future. Without them." It sounded radical, but in a strange way, it resonated inside me. I remembered how Henry had always said, "Never let others decide for you, Irma, even if it's family, especially if it's family." But where would I go? "My cousin lives in Greenfield," Virginia reminded him. "It's only an hour's drive from here. She has a separate annex in her house, small but cozy. She used to rent it out to students, but no one lives there now." Greenfield. It's a small town north of Lebanon. I've been there a couple times, and it seemed like a quiet, pleasant place. And the idea of living near Virginia's cousin, Dorothy, with whom we'd always gotten along, seemed reasonable. "Do you think Dorothy would mind?" "She'll love it," Virginia said confidently. "She's got arthritis, and it's getting harder and harder for her to tend the garden." And you've always loved to tinker with plants. The prospect of a new life, away from Wendy's control, suddenly seemed appealing. I could get a decent sum for my house enough to ensure a comfortable life for the rest of my life, even if I had to rent or buy a new place. You're right, I decided. I'll call the realtor tomorrow. No, Virginia objected. Call now. The sooner the process starts, the less chance Wendy and Brian will be able to intervene. So I called. The realtor, Linda Perry, arrived 2 hours later, an energetic middle-aged woman with a keen eye and a charming smile. Your house is in excellent condition, Mrs. Hollis, she said after looking at all the rooms. And the location is excellent. I think we can put it on the market from Monday. I'd estimate it at $550,000, maybe even more if the bidding starts. I gasped. The amount seemed astronomical. Henry and I had bought this house for $75,000 once, and it had seemed like a fortune to us. That fast? What about the paperwork, the due diligence? I'll organize everything, Linda assured me, but you'll need a good lawyer. I can recommend James Nelson, who specializes in real estate. And, she lowered her voice, he's very good at getting around family complications. Her penetrating gaze didn't hide my embarrassment. I noticed the pictures of your son. Does he know about your decision? No, I admitted, and I'd rather he didn't find out until everything was finalized. Linda nodded understandingly. James will help you with that. He'll draw up the documents to protect your interests. Your son won't be able to challenge the sale, even if he wanted to. The next day, I met with James Nelson, a short man with shrewd eyes behind thick glasses. He listened carefully to my story without expressing surprise or judgment. Unfortunately, these situations are not uncommon, he said when I finished. Many elderly people face pressure from their children when it comes to inheritance or real estate. But the law is on your side, Mrs. Hollis. You have full legal capacity. It's your property, and only you decide what to do with it. He explained to me the sale process, helped me draw up a power of attorney for Linda so she could do showings in my absence, and, most importantly, advised me to transfer the proceeds of the sale to a new account that Brian wouldn't know about. These funds are your insurance, he emphasized. They would ensure your independence and a decent life. Within the next week, my house was officially listed for sale. Linda had organized it so that showings would take place when Brian was at work, and there was no for sale sign on the front door, just a modest online and realtor database listing. At the same time, I called Dorothy, who, as Virginia had predicted, was delighted at the prospect of my moving in. Her annex turned out to be a one-bedroom apartment with a private entrance and a small yard perfect for a woman my age who wanted to maintain her independence but not feel completely alone. Forget the rent, Dorothy said in her characteristic straightforward tone. If you look after the garden and occasionally make your special apple pie, the apartment is yours. Of course, I insisted on a token payment. I didn't want to feel like a freeloader, but it warmed my heart to know that I had a safe haven, a place where I was welcome. Surprisingly, Brian didn't seem to notice any changes. He called less and less often. Now Wendy was too busy at work for our weekly check-ins. I realized they were biding their time, accumulating evidence of my inability to live independently. Perhaps they planned to wait for my next cold or minor injury to put their plan into action, but I was ahead of them. On the 10th day after posting the ad, Linda called with the happy news. We have an offer, Mrs. Hollis. $565,000, no bidding, cash. Buyers can close within 3 weeks. What do you say? I said yes without hesitation. The price was more than fair, and the speed of closing ensured that Brian and Wendy wouldn't interfere. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly packing, sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. I decided to keep most of the furniture I'd need, only the essentials in Dorothy's small apartment. But personal belongings, photographs, favorite books, memorabilia from my travels with Henry, I packed carefully into boxes, which I gradually moved to Dorothy's apartment under the pretense of cleaning and sorting old things. Brian and Wendy never showed up. Only once did the son call to say that he and his wife were leaving for the weekend to look at houses in a neighboring town. A neighborhood with great schools and a medical center, he said, and I remembered that medical center meant nursing home in Wendy's language. That sounds wonderful, dear, I replied, feeling strangely calm. I hope you find what you're looking for. The day before the deal closed, I moved the last of my belongings into Dorothy's place. The apartment was small but cozy, with large windows overlooking the garden. Dorothy helped me arrange the furniture, my favorite chair, a small desk that had once belonged to Henry, a few lamps and bookshelves. On the wall above the fireplace, I hung my husband and I's wedding photos and a few snapshots of little Brian. No matter what, he was still my son. When everything was ready, Dorothy and I sat on her front porch with cups of hot tea. "How are you feeling?" she asked, looking out at the sunset. "Strange," I admitted. "Sad to have to run away from my own son like this, but at the same time, free. For the first time in a long time, I'm making decisions for myself." Dorothy nodded understandingly. "You know, Irma, sometimes the greatest act of love for loved ones is to let them go, to let them live with the consequences of their decisions. Maybe that's exactly what your son needs." I thought about what she said. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'd been too protective of Brian for too long, too easily forgiving of his weaknesses, not demanding responsibility. And the result is a 47-year-old man who lets his wife run his mother's life. "Thank you for having me," I said to Dorothy. "Nonsense," she snorted. "Virginia would have killed me if I'd said no. Besides, I enjoy your company. My garden hasn't seen a caring hand in a long time." I smiled as I imagined tending to Dorothy's garden, planting new flowers, maybe even planting a small vegetable garden. Henry always said I found a special peace in gardening. The next morning, I had to meet James to sign the final papers on the sale of the house. And then I had the hardest part, telling Brian about my decision. Not over the phone, but not in person. I wasn't ready to see his reaction yet. I decided to write a letter that I would leave in the empty house, a letter in which I would explain my motives, not blaming, but not making excuses either. It would be the first step to a new relationship, a relationship between two adults, not a mother and child to be protected. As I fell asleep in my new bed, to the unfamiliar sounds of Dorothy's house, I thought about tomorrow, about how I would sign the papers, officially selling the house I'd lived in for almost 50 years, about how Brian would find out about my decision, about how Wendy would react when she realized her plans had fallen through. Strangely, these thoughts were not disturbing, more like a sense of release and quiet determination. James Nelson, my lawyer, turned out to be exactly the kind of professional Linda had recommended. The transaction to sell the house went smoothly and quickly. By the time I signed the final documents, I had moved into Dorothy's apartment and was getting used to the new place. Her garden was my salvation. I spent hours tidying up neglected beds and planning what I would plant in the spring. I wrote a letter to Brian and left it on the kitchen table in the now empty house. In the letter, I didn't go into detail about the conversation I had overheard, just explained that I had decided to sell the house and move to start a new chapter of my life. I included Dorothy's address and told her that the door to her home was always open to her son. I wanted to believe that our relationship could still be salvaged, even though I realized it would never be the same. For a week after the deal closed, I waited for a call from Brian, but the phone was silent. I began to worry that the letter had gotten lost or that the new owners had thrown it away without noticing. But on the 10th day, as I was having breakfast with Dorothy on the terrace, enjoying the warm fall morning, my phone finally rang. Mom? Brian's voice sounded strained, almost hoarse. Yes, darling. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for a difficult conversation. Did you get my letter? I did, he said quietly. We need to talk, in person. Can I come over tonight? I looked over at Dorothy, who, of course, had heard our conversation. Sure. Do you know the address? Yes, you gave it in your letter. I paused again. I'll be there around 1 if that's convenient. I'll be waiting. I felt my heart pounding as the call ended. There was something in Brian's voice that alarmed me. It didn't just sound surprised or upset. It sounded broken. Do you want me to stay? Dorothy asked, picking up the plates from the table. I shook my head. No, I think we should talk alone. But thank you. Suit yourself, she shrugged. Anyway, I have to stop at the pharmacy and the grocery store. I'll be back for dinner. Left alone, I started nervously tidying up the apartment, even though it was already sparkling clean. I rearranged knickknacks, corrected the pictures on the walls, wiped the dining room table twice, all to keep her hands busy and take her mind off her troubling thoughts. At exactly 1 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it and barely recognized my son. Brian looked haggard with dark shadows under his eyes, his cheeks sunken, and even his usually perfect clothes looked wrinkled, as if he'd slept in them. Brian, I exclaimed involuntarily. What happened to you? He smiled weakly. Can I come in, Mom? I stepped aside, letting him into the apartment. He looked around, noting the things I'd arranged, most of them familiar to him from his childhood. Henry's chair, the desk lamp from my study, the bookshelves of tattered volumes of his favorite books. Cozy, he said at last. Smaller than your house, but cozy. Sit down. I pointed to the couch. Would you like some coffee? No, thanks. He sat down with his hands between his knees. Mom, there's something I have to tell you. I sat across from him, waiting for the conversation about selling the house to begin, preparing myself for recriminations, maybe even accusations. But Brian's words stunned me. Wendy and I are getting a divorce, he said, looking down at the floor. Divorced? I couldn't hide my surprise. Why? What had happened? Brian rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture I remembered from his childhood. It was something he always did when he was confused or depressed. It's a long story. Long story short, I found out Wendy was cheating on me for over a year now with her boss at the law firm. I gasped. Despite my complicated feelings for my sister-in-law, it was shocking news. Brian, I'm so sorry. Don't be, he grinned bitterly. Our marriage was a mistake from the beginning. I just refused to admit it for too long. He finally looked up and looked at me. But it's more than that. When I told her I knew about the affair and wanted a divorce, Wendy showed her true colors. She started threatening to take everything. The house, half of my savings, even your house. I tensed up. My house? How? It's only in my name. She claimed she had proof that you were incapacitated, Brian said so quietly I could barely hear him. All those months of checking your blood pressure, taking pictures of your medicine cabinet. It was her idea. She was gathering evidence, planning to file for guardianship to gain control of your estate. The shock of his words was physically palpable. I felt a chill go through my insides. Wendy's plan was even more sinister than I'd realized. And you, went along with it? My voice shook. Brian lowered his head even further. I didn't know all the details. She said she was worried about you, that you needed help. And I was blind and stupid. There was a heavy pause. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hug my son, to comfort him. The other part of me felt the deep, piercing pain of knowing that someone I loved, albeit under the influence, had participated in such a betrayal. Anyway, Brian continued, I didn't just come to tell you about the divorce. I wanted to warn you. Wendy is furious. When she found out that you sold the house, he hesitated. I've never seen her so furious. Does she know I moved here? I didn't tell her the address. Brian shook his head. But she knows you're somewhere in Greenfield. And she's not herself, Mom. Be careful. I got up and walked over to the window, looking out at the fall garden. The maple leaves were starting to turn red, turning the yard into an impressionist painting. Thanks for the warning, I said without turning around. But I'm not afraid of Wendy. What could she possibly do to me? The house is sold. The money is safe. I have a lawyer. She's a lawyer too, Brian reminded me. And she's connected. Just, stay alert, okay? I turned to my son. Why didn't you tell me about the problems in your marriage sooner? I could have helped. He smiled sadly. Wendy had a way of convincing me that all my doubts were just paranoia, that we had the perfect marriage, that all the problems were in my head. He sighed. And then I didn't want to upset you. You were always so happy that I was finally married, that I had a family. My heart squeezed. Yes, I was really happy that he was getting married. Not because I wanted to get my son out of my hands, but because I wanted him to be happy. Brian, the one thing I've always wanted for you is happiness. Not the perfect family, not the right wife, not living up to someone else's expectations. Just happiness. My son got up off the couch and walked over to me. For the first time in years, he hugged me really tightly, like he did when he was a child, when he would come to me with his little troubles, seeking comfort. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered, for everything. I hugged him back, feeling the wall of alienation that had built up between us over the years of his marriage crumble. We stood like that for maybe a minute, silent, just holding each other. Finally, Brian pulled away and wiped his eyes. I have to go. I have a meeting with my divorce lawyer. But I'll be back, okay? Maybe over the weekend, if that's okay with you. Sure, I smiled. I'd be happy to. After I walked my son to the door, I stood on the threshold for a long time, watching his car pull out of Dorothy's yard. The conversation had left me with conflicting feelings, pain and disappointment mixed with relief and hope. Perhaps this painful situation would eventually help us rebuild our relationship, grow closer. I went back to the apartment and started cooking dinner, thinking about everything I had heard. Brian and Wendy were getting divorced. She was cheating on him. She was planning to declare me incapacitated so she could take over my house. It sounded like the plot of a cheap melodrama, not the real life of an ordinary family from Lebanon. All the more surprising to me was the phone call that rang 2 hours after Brian left. When I saw the unknown number on the screen, I answered it. Hello? I finally found you, you old witch. Wendy's voice, usually sweet and controlled, was now ringing with rage. I was so stunned that I was speechless for a moment. Wendy, how did I know where you were? She interrupted. Oh, it wasn't hard. Brian's so predictable, so transparent. All you had to do was follow him. Did you really think you could just run away like that? Hide from me? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. I shouldn't have shown my sister-in-law how scared she was of me. I didn't run away, Wendy. I just moved. At my age, it's natural to choose a smaller place, closer to friends. Don't lie to me, she hissed. You sold the house to spite us, to disinherit us. I felt anger rising inside me. Inheritance? The house was mine, Wendy. It was mine, and I had every right to use it as I saw fit. It doesn't matter. Her voice grew colder. You know what? I'm glad you sold the damn house, because now you have money. Do you know who it's gonna go to in the divorce? I didn't say anything, already guessing where she was going with this. Me, Wendy said triumphantly. According to state law, all property is divided in half in a divorce, and since your little boy is the sole heir, his inheritance is considered marital property, so half the value of the house is mine. But the house has already been sold, I reminded him, trying to speak calmly. And the money from the sale was my own money, not Brian's inheritance. Wendy laughed, shrill, almost hysterical. It doesn't matter. My lawyer's already preparing the lawsuit. We'll prove that you sold the house to hurt me, to deprive me of my share. It's called embezzlement in anticipation of divorce. The court will make you pay me damages. Wendy, you're talking nonsense. I tried to sound more confident than I felt. I sold my property. I never had any obligation to you. After I divorce your son, Wendy continued, as if she hadn't heard me, you'll be left on the street. I'll sue for every dime you made off the sale. It was ridiculous, absurd, and frightening at the same time. I knew she was legally wrong, but her conviction made me nervous. But suddenly, I remembered the words of James Nelson, my lawyer. The money has been transferred to an account your son doesn't know about. The paperwork is impeccable. No one can challenge this transaction. The thought gave me confidence. Wendy, I said in as calm a voice as possible, I put the house on the market before you called. There was silence. Then Wendy exploded. What? You're lying. You wouldn't dare. I sold the house 3 weeks ago. I continued in the same even tone. The deal is closed. The money has been received. It's legal and irreversible. Wendy screamed so loudly that I had to pull the receiver away from my ear. The stream of swear words and threats was so furious that I couldn't make out half the words. Finally, she broke down and spoke more softly, but with the same venom in her voice. You're going to regret this, old woman. I swear you'll regret it. I'm not going to let some out of my mind pensioner ruin my plans. What plans, Wendy? I asked. Put me in a nursing home to take over my house? Or declare me incompetent and become my guardian? Brian told me everything. Silence again, then a sharp intake of breath. He what? Oh my. She paused. It doesn't matter. This isn't over, Irma. I'll find a way to get what's mine. In the meantime, enjoy your pathetic independence. It won't last long. With those words, she hung up the phone. I sank slowly into my chair, feeling my hands shaking. Wendy's threats were ridiculous from a legal standpoint, but her rage frightened me. She was clearly capable of a lot of things. Before I could recover from that call, I heard the squeal of brakes outside. Looking out the window, I saw Wendy's black sports car parked at Dorothy's gate in flagrant violation of the rules half on the sidewalk. She jumped out of the car and, without closing the door, rushed toward the house. It took my breath away. It was one thing to hear threats over the phone, and quite another to face an enraged Wendy face to face. I vacillated between wanting to hide and not answer the door, and wanting to face this storm with dignity. Wendy did not ring the doorbell but simply pounded on it with her fists. Open up, Irma. I know you're in there. Open up right now. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage, and opened the door. Wendy flew into the apartment like a hurricane, flushed, her hair disheveled, and a crazy gleam in her eyes. I'd never seen her like this, usually immaculately dressed and coiffed. She looked like a fury. You, she jabbed her finger at me. You ruined everything, everything I've been planning for years. I took a step back, keeping my distance. Wendy, you should leave. You're in no condition to talk. Oh, no. She shook her head, taking a step forward. I'm not going anywhere until I get some answers. How long have you been planning this meanness? How long ago did you decide to disinherit your only son? I didn't disinherit anyone. I tried to speak firmly, but calmly. All I did was dispose of my property. And as for Brian, he'll always get his share when the time comes. When the time is right, she mocked. You expect me to believe you won't leave all your money to that old woman you're staying with? Or your friend Virginia, just so I don't get any of it? I felt anger rising inside. My will is none of your business, Wendy. It never has been, and it never will be. And yes, I will leave my money to those I deem worthy. Those who love me unselfishly and don't see me only as a source of profit. Wendy laughed bitterly, shrilly. Unselfishly? Do you really think your precious son loves you unselfishly? That he has visited you all these years out of pure filial love? She shook her head. Poor, naive Irma. Brian only came to see you because I forced him to. Check to see if her condition has worsened. Take pictures of her pills. See if the roof is leaking. He did my errands like an obedient dog. Her words hurt, but I didn't let it show. If so, then I'm all the more glad I protected my interests. You betrayed your own son, Wendy shouted, taking another step toward me. You were supposed to be looking out for his well-being, for his future, and instead you ruined everything. I didn't betray anyone, I replied, keeping my voice from shaking. Betrayal is planning to put your mother-in-law in a nursing home to take over her estate. Betrayal is collecting evidence of incapacity from someone who is fully capable. Wendy's eyes widened. He told you? She hesitated. Then her face contorted into an angry grimace. Well, it doesn't matter. You're going to lose anyway, Irma. I'll sue. I'll prove that you sold the house to disinherit Brian during the divorce proceedings. That's illegal. My lawyer has a different opinion, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. James Nelson is one of the best real estate specialists in the state. Do you know that name? Wendy flinched. Obviously, the name was familiar to her. You're bluffing, she said uncertainly. Nelson wouldn't take on such a small case. $500,000 isn't such a small thing. I allowed myself a slight smile. Besides, James doesn't like it when someone tries to manipulate the elderly. It's a personal thing, you know. His mother was the victim of a similar scheme years ago. It was true. James had actually told me his mother's story when he was explaining why he was so careful to protect the rights of elderly clients. Wendy turned pale. Her pressure was beginning to wear off. This isn't over, she muttered. I'll find a way. Wendy, I interrupted her, suddenly feeling tired of this scene. Go away, just go. You've lost. The house is sold, the money is safe. Brian knows your plans. It's over. She stood, clenching and unclenching her fists, as if physically holding back her rage. You'll be sorry, she hissed at last. And so will your ungrateful son. I will destroy you both. Is that a threat? I asked calmly, because if it is, I can call the police. I pointed to the phone lying on the table by the door. Wendy froze, then took a step back. Apparently, the prospect of explaining herself to the police had cooled her fervor. Don't bother, she hissed. I'm leaving, but don't think that's the end of it. She turned and headed for the exit. She stopped on the threshold and tossed over her shoulder. By the way, your precious son is a pathetic loser who will slide to rock bottom without me. He's weak, helpless, and would never succeed if it weren't for me. And you'll have to watch him ruin his life after the divorce. That will be my little revenge. With those words, she walked out, slamming the door loudly. A moment later, I heard the roar of her car engine, the squeal of tires, and the sound of a car speeding away. I sank into my chair, feeling my knees shake. The tension of the last few minutes finally released, and I burst into tears, the first time in years that I'd cried so uncontrollably, without trying to hold back. I cried for the trust lost, for the broken relationship, for the son who'd allowed his wife to plan such a betrayal, for the years I'd turned a blind eye to the obvious signs of Wendy's manipulation. But somewhere deep inside, behind the shroud of bitter tears, I felt another feeling: relief. I had protected myself. I hadn't let them take away my home, my independence, my dignity. For the first time in years, I had acted decisively, thinking of my own interests, not what others expected of me. When the tears finally dried up, I got up, washed my face with cold water, and made strong tea. Sitting by the window with a steaming cup, I looked out at Dorothy's fall garden and thought about the future. About Brian, who must now rebuild his life without Wendy's control. About our relationship, which could probably still be repaired. About my new life here in Greenfield, among people who really care about me. Wendy's threats still rang in my ears, but they didn't scare me as much anymore. I had a good lawyer, a reliable bank account, a roof over my head, and friends to support me, and a newfound confidence in my abilities. I took a sip of tea and smiled at my reflection in the window pane. "You have so much strength in you, Irma," I heard Henry's voice say. "You just didn't know it yourself yet." Now I did, and that was the most important gain I'd made in years. The morning after Wendy's visit, I woke up with a headache. The events of yesterday seemed unreal, like a scene from a bad TV show. Was it possible that my sister-in-law, always so polite and reserved, albeit cold, had turned into a veritable fury, threatening judgment and revenge, all because of a house that never belonged to her? I made myself some tea and sat by the window, watching Dorothy prune the rose bushes in the garden. She came back late in the afternoon, and when she saw my condition, she didn't question me, just hugged me and told me that I could always count on her support. I was grateful for this silent understanding. The phone rang at 10 sharp. It was Brian. "Mom?" His voice sounded strained. "We need to talk. Now." My heart squeezed with anxiety. "Of course, darling. What's wrong?" "Wendy told me about your, conversation." He paused. "I'll be at your place in 40 minutes. He hung up before I could answer. I put the phone away, feeling the anxiety building inside. Of course, Wendy had given him her version of events, probably portraying herself as the victim and me as the villain who disinherited the family. And Brian, despite their divorce, seemed to believe her. I went out into the garden, where Dorothy was finishing the roses. "Dorothy," I called to my friend, "Brian's on his way here." He just called, sounding very angry. Probably Wendy complained to him about me. Dorothy straightened up, taking off her gardening gloves. "You want me to be present for the conversation?" I shook my head. "No, but maybe you should go out. I'm afraid this conversation is going to be uncomfortable. I don't want to drag you into it." Dorothy looked at me with concern. "Are you sure? Your son doesn't seem like an aggressive person, but in this condition—" "Brian has never been aggressive," I assured her. "He might raise his voice, but that's all. It's just, we need to talk privately. Maybe finally say something that's been building up for years." Dorothy nodded understandingly. "Good. I was going to visit Martha on the west side of town anyway. I'll be back for lunch." She squeezed my hand. "Hang in there, Irma. And remember, you didn't do anything wrong. You protected yourself, that's all." After Dorothy left, I made fresh tea and cookies. These were mechanical, habitual activities to help calm my nerves. In my head, I was running through possible scenarios for the upcoming conversation, preparing answers to the accusations Brian would undoubtedly make. The doorbell rang exactly 40 minutes after it rang. Punctuality had always been my son's strong suit. Taking a deep breath, I went to open it. Brian stood on the doorstep, pale and tense. Unlike yesterday's visit, when he had looked depressed and confused, today there was anger in his eyes. "Come in." I stepped back, letting him into the apartment. He stepped inside, glanced around the room, but refused to sit down when I offered. Mom, he began without preamble. What the hell is going on? Wendy came home hysterical yesterday, screaming about you selling the house to spite us and threatening her with the police. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Wendy stormed in here yesterday after you and I talked, threatening me with a lawsuit and yelling that I disinherited you. I had to remind her that uninvited intrusion and threats might interest the police. Only then did she leave. But you did sell the house? It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Without consulting me, without saying a word, you just sold the only thing Dad had left. His last words struck a nerve. The house wasn't the only thing left of Dad. There were memories, photographs, things I had cherished, and most importantly, there were the values Henry had taught us. Brian, I tried to speak softly. The house was in my name. It was my decision to sell it. But why? He spread his hands. Why so suddenly? Why sneak around? Do you realize how it looks from the outside? I sat down in the chair, feeling suddenly tired. Sit down, please. Let's talk normally. After a second's hesitation, Brian sank down on the sofa opposite me. I sold the house because I found out about your plans, I said bluntly, about how Wendy was going to put me in a nursing home and take over my property. Brian flinched but didn't look away. I told you, I didn't know all the details of her plan. But you knew enough, I countered. You took pictures of my pills, checked my blood pressure, sent Wendy reports on the state of the house. What did you think it all meant? My son lowered his head. I thought we were just taking care of you. Wendy said it was dangerous to live alone at your age, that we had to be prepared for all eventualities. The option of you taking over my life and property? I couldn't help the bitterness in my voice. No, he raised his head. I never thought of the house as prey. It was our family home, Mom. The place where I grew up, where all my memories of Dad are buried. Mine too, I said quietly. Believe me, the decision to sell wasn't easy, but I had to protect myself. Brian jumped up from the couch, starting to pace around the room. Protect from who? From me? From your own son? He stopped, looking at me with pain in his eyes. Are you really that distrustful of me? The question hit me right in the heart. Did I trust my son? A month ago, I wouldn't have hesitated to say yes. But now? Brian, I tried to find the right words. This isn't about trust. It's that for the last 5 years, I've watched you change under Wendy's influence. How you stop being yourself, become her echo, her tool. That's not true. He shook his head, but there was no confidence in his voice. Isn't it? I leaned forward. When was the last time you spent time with me of your own volition, and not because Wendy made up a visitation schedule? When was the last time you asked how I was feeling, genuinely interested in the answer, and not for a check mark on your report of my condition? Brian was silent, and I continued, feeling the emotions I'd been holding back for years bursting out. Remember how you and I used to talk about books, politics, movies? How we used to argue about music? When did that stop, Brian? When did our conversations get reduced to questions about my blood pressure and whether the roof was leaking? You're being unfair, he said quietly. I've always cared about you. Caring isn't about control, I countered. Caring is respect. Respect for my right to make decisions, to have my own opinion, to live my life the way I see fit. Brian sat down again, slumping his shoulders. I didn't mean to control you. Maybe you did, I agreed. But you let Wendy do it. You became her accomplice, Brian. Maybe unknowingly, maybe with good intentions, but you were part of her plan. My son was silent for a long time, digesting my words. Then he looked up. Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say I was wrong to let Wendy interfere in your life. But selling the house, it's too much, Mom. This is our family history. Family history isn't in the walls, Brian, I said softly. It's in us, in our memories, in the values we share, or once shared. And yet, he shook his head, you could have at least consulted me, warned me. How did you warn me of your plans to send me to a nursing home? I asked bitterly. He flinched as if I'd struck him. I told you I didn't know all the details. But you knew, I insisted. You couldn't help but realize where this was going. Wendy wasn't exactly hiding her intentions. Remember when she showed me the Sunny Acres brochures? How she talked about how I should think about a better place to live at my age. You were there, Brian. You heard, and you were silent. My son looked away, and in that gesture, I saw confirmation that I was right. Besides, I continued, I was scared, Brian, really scared. Imagine yourself in my shoes, your own child and his spouse planning to take away your independence, your home, your autonomy. What would you do? I would talk to me, he exclaimed. I would have voiced my concerns, given you a chance to make things right. I smiled sadly. Really? I think you would have done exactly what I did. You would have protected yourself in every way you could. My son got up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. His back seemed tense, his shoulders heavy from the weight of my words. You know what, Mom? He finally said without turning around. I'm beginning to think Wendy was right about you. Not about the nursing home thing, of course, but that you've always been a little too self-reliant, too sure you knew best. Even when Dad was alive, you always had the last word. It was so unfair that I was speechless for a moment. It's not true, I finally said. Henry and I always made decisions together, always consulted with each other. Did we? Brian turned to me. What about me going to college? My dad wanted me to go to a technical school, study engineering. But you insisted on liberal arts, and the result is that I'm stuck in financial analysis, a job I hate. I was shocked. Brian had never before said he hated his job. What's more, I was sure that choosing college had been his own decision. Brian, I said slowly, you chose Berkeley. Dad and I only supported your choice because you led me to believe that it was the only right way, he exclaimed. All those books you read to me, all that talk about the importance of a liberal arts education. Dad couldn't get over your influence. I was stunned by this distortion of the past. Brian, that's absolutely not true. Your father never insisted on a technical college. He just mentioned it as an option. You're the one who decided, no, Mom, he interrupted me. It was your decision. You always have. You decided everything in our family, and now you've decided to sell the house without asking me, like my opinion doesn't even exist. So that's how you see our family? I said slowly. Me as a dictator and yourself as a victim of my control? Did Wendy instill that version of the past in you? Don't bring Wendy into this, he snapped. This is between us. Oh no, I shook my head. Wendy had everything to do with it. She's the one who's been turning you against me for years, rewriting our family history, making you doubt your own memories. That's not true, but his voice sounded unsure. It isn't. I rose from my chair. Then tell me, Brian, do you remember when Dad taught you how to ride a bike? How you practiced for hours in the park until you finally rode on your own, unsupported? Brian frowned. Of course I remember. Do you remember what Dad said to you the first time you rode a whole lap without his help? My son thought for a moment, then said slowly, He said, he said, see, son, I told you you could do it. Exactly. I nodded. Now tell me, how could a man who couldn't stand for what he thought was right, who was supposedly always inferior to me, spend hours in the park with you, teaching you what he thought was important. Brian was silent, and I felt I had found a crack in the wall of his beliefs. But instead of admitting I was right, he was suddenly fierce. Still, you had no right to sell the house without my knowledge. You knew how much it meant to me. You betrayed our family, our past, the memory of Dad. Brian, I tried to object, but he interrupted me. No, Mom, I don't want to hear any more of your excuses. You made your choice. I'm making mine. He headed for the door, but stopped on the threshold. Do you think Wendy is the only one who's manipulative? Look in the mirror, Mom. You've been doing this my whole life. It's just that I've finally had an epiphany. With those words, he walked out, slamming the door loudly. I heard him walk quickly down the stairs, followed by the roar of his car engine and the squeal of tires, so similar to Wendy's departure yesterday. I sank into the chair, feeling a strange emptiness inside. The conversation with my son hadn't gone the way I'd hoped. Instead of understanding and reconciliation, there were new accusations, new hurt, and a new breakup. Perhaps in time Brian will realize this. Maybe when the emotions subside and he's free of Wendy's influence, we can revisit this conversation. But for now, right now, all I had to do was accept his anger and pain. I opened my eyes and saw that the room had gone dark. How long had I been sitting there, lost in thought? The clock showed almost 5 o'clock in the evening. Dorothy was due back any minute. I got up, feeling heavy in every cell of my body. I went into the kitchen and began to prepare dinner, a simple mechanical act that helped distract me from my heavy thoughts. Soon Dorothy returned. One look at my face told her all she needed to know. "Tough conversation?" she asked, taking off her coat. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "He'll understand," Dorothy said softly, coming over and putting her arm around my shoulders. "In time, he'll understand." "I hope so," I said. "But right now, he thinks I betrayed my family, sold the house to spite him, erased my memory of Henry." "Nonsense," Dorothy snorted. "The memory of your husband isn't in the walls and the roof. It's in the heart." Her simple words echoed strangely with what I'd said to Brian, and for some reason, it made me feel a little better. "You know," Dorothy continued, helping me set the table, "I remember how proud Henry was of you. Your strength, your independence. He always said, 'My Irma wouldn't let anyone hurt her.' And he was right. Those words warmed my soul. Yes, Henry believed in me, in my strength and resilience. And now, perhaps for the first time in years, I really showed those qualities. It had been a week since the difficult conversation with Brian. He hadn't called or come over, and every night I looked at the phone, hoping he'd be the first to make a move toward reconciliation. But the phone was silent, and my pride wouldn't let me call on my own. After all, I hadn't done anything wrong, just protected myself from his wife's manipulations. And until Brian realized that, any attempts at reconciliation would only serve to strengthen his self-confidence. On Thursday, James Nelson, my lawyer, called. "Mrs. Hollis, I have good news. The sale of your house is officially closed. The money has been deposited into your account in full. Congratulations, you're no longer a homeowner." I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. On the one hand, the house was sold, and I no longer had to worry that Wendy could somehow take it away. On the other hand, I was sad to finally say goodbye to the place where most of my life had been spent. "Thank you, Mr. Nelson," I replied, "both for the good news and for all your help." He also warned me that Wendy had called him trying to find loopholes to challenge the deal, but they were empty threats. Legally, I was completely protected. On Saturday, Dorothy and I went to my former home to pack up the rest of my belongings. The truck was due the next day. The work progressed briskly, and by noon, we had packed almost everything I planned to take away. We were just making tea in the nearly empty kitchen when the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I saw Wendy, impeccably dressed, with a look of softness on her face, not at all like the fury that had visited me last time. Irma, she stepped forward. May I speak to you? Alone? Dorothy reluctantly left us, and Wendy got right to the point. I've come to apologize, Irma, for my behavior the last time we met. I was, out of sorts. I looked at her carefully, trying to see if she was sincere. In the 5 years that Wendy had been Brian's wife, I had learned to recognize her little tricks and subterfuges. Now she was clearly up to something. I would also like to propose a solution, she continued, looking up at me. A solution that might satisfy everyone. I'm listening, I said, trying to keep my voice from betraying skepticism. Wendy leaned forward, her voice softer, almost conspiratorial. Irma, I understand your desire to protect yourself, but selling the house, it's an extreme measure that's destroying our family. Brian is very upset. Brian is a grown man, I said firmly. He should realize that I make my own decisions about my property. Of course, she agreed hastily. But still, a house isn't just an asset. It's a family legacy. She offered a compromise. I would cancel the sale of the house, even if it cost me a significant penalty, and she and Brian would guarantee that they wouldn't insist I move into a nursing home. I almost marveled at the audacity of that offer. Wendy, I said slowly, the house has already been sold. The deal is closed. The money has been transferred. It's a legally enforceable fact. Her smile became strained. I understand, but there are always ways to get around the formalities, especially if you're willing to pay a penalty. Wendy, you and Brian are getting a divorce. What's in it for you to keep this house in the family? She wasn't embarrassed. Despite Brian and I differences, I still care about his welfare. And yours too, Irma. Please, Wendy, let's not play games. We both know you're only interested in money. Tell me straight, what do you want to get? Her mask of benevolence wavered for a moment, but was quickly restored. All right, Irma. Under the terms of our prenup, if Brian and I divorce, I get half of whatever he inherits during the marriage. If you sell the house and you keep the money, I get nothing. Finally, the truth. Wendy's only ever been interested in money. Even if I wanted to, and I don't, I can't cancel the sale. The contract is signed. The money has been transferred. The new owners are preparing to move in. It's a done deal. Her face began to change, the mask of friendliness slipping away, revealing her true feelings, anger and frustration. You could at least try, she hissed. For Brian's sake. I've done enough for Brian, I said firmly. I'd spent my whole life thinking about him first. Now it was time to think of myself. Wendy stood up, her eyes narrowing. So that's it? You choose your selfish independence over your family? I choose freedom from manipulation, Wendy, including from yours. She grinned, not a sweet smile, but a predator's grin. You'll regret this, Irma. I'll find a way to get what's mine. Through the courts? I raised an eyebrow. My lawyer said you don't have any legal grounds for a claim. Your lawyer isn't all powerful, she snapped. There are other ways, like through Brian. Yeah, we're getting a divorce, but he still listens to me more than he listens to you. I can convince him that you sold the house out of spite, out of petty revenge, that you never really loved him, only used him. That's not true, I said indignantly, and Brian knows it. Does he? Then why hasn't he called you yet? Why hasn't he come? Why has he been avoiding you since the last time you spoke to him? Her words hurt me because there was a grain of truth in them. I think you should go. I got up from the couch. Oh, I'm leaving. Wendy headed for the door. But mark my words, Irma, this isn't over. You have chosen war over peace, and I accept your challenge. After she left, I sank to the couch, feeling my knees shake. Dorothy returned from the kitchen with cups of fresh tea. "That snake," she said. "How dare she threaten you?" Wendy was always a master manipulator, I sighed. First the carrot, then the stick. You were right to say no. Dorothy sat down next to me. Even if you could have canceled the sale, it would have been a mistake. That woman would never leave you alone. We went back to work, but my thoughts were far away. I thought about my life, the decades I'd spent in this house, about Henry, about our marriage, about raising our son together. But most of all, I thought about the future, about a new life in Greenfield, the chance to start over, unencumbered by the burden of other people's expectations and manipulations, the freedom to make my own decisions, guided only by my own wants and needs. For the first time in years, I was thinking about myself instead of Brian. And it was, liberating. The move was completed faster than I expected. The truck with the rest of my belongings arrived in Greenfield early Saturday morning. The driver and his helper turned out to be diligent young men who not only delivered my furniture and boxes of stuff, but also helped get everything into the apartment. By noon, the main work was done, and sitting in my old armchair, which now occupied the place of honor by the window in the new living room, I was surprised to realize that I did not feel tired or sad, but a strange, almost forgotten feeling of anticipation. Dorothy dropped by after lunch, bringing me a homemade apple pie and a thermos of hot tea. "How are you settling in?" she asked, looking around the room, where boxes were piled along the walls, waiting to be unpacked. "Little by little," I smiled. "I've set out the essentials, and the rest can wait until tomorrow." "You'll have guests tonight," Dorothy said, setting the cups on the small table. "I hope you're not too tired for a little welcome dinner." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "Guests? What do you mean?" Dorothy smiled slyly. "Virginia's coming. I also called my cousin Beatrice. Remember I told you about her? She lives 3 blocks from here, and she'd really like to meet you." I felt a slight thrill. Virginia, my oldest friend, would be here today. It was a pleasant surprise. And meeting Beatrice, of whom Dorothy had told me so much, could be the beginning of a new acquaintance, perhaps even a friendship. "That's wonderful," I said. "But I'm not prepared to host. I don't even have groceries." "I've taken care of everything," Dorothy said. "Beatrice is bringing her special chicken and mushroom casserole, and Virginia promised to bring wine. All you have to do is welcome us into your new home." My heart was filled with warmth at such thoughtfulness. "You're a true friend, Dorothy. I don't know how I can thank you enough for all you do for me." She brushed it off, but I could see the slight blush on her cheeks. "Oh, come on. We old women have to stick together. If you tear up that neglected patch behind the house in the spring and grow fresh tomatoes for me, we'll call it even." We laughed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that I was exactly where I should be, surrounded by people who valued me not for what I owned or what I could give, but simply for who I was. The evening with my friends was delightful. Beatrice proved to be an open, outgoing woman with a terrific sense of humor and an inexhaustible supply of stories about life in Greenfield. She talked about neighbors, local events, and the best stores and cafes. Virginia, upon seeing me, declared that I looked like a real Irma, not a cornered mouse. And I realized she was right. Something had changed in me during those weeks. I had regained my confidence and self-esteem. The next day, I decided to explore the town. Greenfield was exactly as I'd imagined, a quiet, cozy community with low houses, small stores, and friendly people. I walked the streets, enjoying the fall colors and the feeling of new life beginning. An unexpected surprise awaited me at the Old Pages bookstore. Its owner, Arthur Jenkins, a tall, gray-haired man with a shrewd eye, Upon learning that I had once owned my own bookstore, offered me a part-time job. I've always lacked an assistant who really understands books. He said, if you ever get bored in your new life, you know where to find me. I made no immediate response, but the thought of returning to the work I loved, working among books, interacting with readers, filled me with joyful anticipation. For the first time in a long time, I thought about the future with hope rather than anxiety. That evening, as I was preparing dinner, the phone rang. When I saw Brian's name on the screen, I felt my heart squeeze. It had been almost 2 weeks since we'd last seen each other, and I was beginning to think he wouldn't call at all. Hello, Brian. Hello, Mom. His voice sounded uncertain. How are you? Fine, I answered truthfully. I just got back from a walk around town. It's really nice here. A pause followed, then, have you completely moved in yet? I stopped by the old house yesterday. The new owners are already there. Yes, the move is complete, I said, trying not to show how hurt I was that he'd stopped by the house but hadn't contacted me. And he stammered, my baby stuff, my albums, my toys, everything's safe, I assured him. I have the boxes of your things. If you want, I can bring them in or ship them. Thank you. His voice softened a little. Yeah, I'd like to pick them up myself, if you don't mind. Of course, I said, trying to hide my excitement. You can come any time. There was another pause, longer than the previous ones. Then Brian said something I hadn't expected. Mom, I want to apologize for the way I acted the last time we met. I was, unfair to you. His words took me by surprise. Thank you, Brian, I said softly. It means a lot to me. I still don't agree with the way you acted, he added quickly. I still feel like you could have at least warned me about selling the house, but I understand why you did it, and I read the papers I found in my things after Wendy left. Papers? I didn't understand. Yeah. His voice got quieter. Files about, the nursing home, about the legal procedures for declaring a person incapacitated. Oh, how to gain control of an elderly relative's estate. I didn't say a word, shocked. So Wendy wasn't just making plans, she'd already started gathering the necessary paperwork. Wendy convinced me that it was all for your own good, Brian continued, that it was dangerous to live alone at your age, that you needed constant care and supervision. Yeah, I really believed that we cared about you. I know, I said quietly, but I see now that she was just manipulating me. His voice trembled. Used my concern for you to further her own ends, and I let her do it. You're not the only one who's been manipulated by Wendy. I tried to comfort him. She was very good at playing on people's emotions. But I should have seen it. He sounded desperate. I should have known what was going on. Protect you, not become an accomplice. I paused, thinking about my answer. Then I said what I really felt. Brian, I don't hold a grudge against you. I really don't. I'm upset about the way things turned out, but I realize you didn't mean to hurt me. And I still love you. You're my son, and that's never gonna change. I heard him take a deep breath, as if holding back tears. Thank you, Mom, he said hoarsely. I love you too. And I'm sorry. I know, I interrupted him gently. Let's just, uh, start over, okay? No recriminations or old grudges. I'd like that. There was hope in his voice. Maybe I could come down this weekend, get my stuff and, uh, just talk. I'd be really happy to, I said sincerely. Good. He sounded more confident. Then, Saturday? Until Saturday, I confirmed. After the conversation, I sat staring at the phone in my hand for a long time. My heart was full of contradictory emotions, relief, joy at the prospect of restoring our relationship, but also bitterness at the realization of how much time we had lost, how much pain we had caused each other. I realized that our relationship would never be the same. Too much had been said, too many wounds inflicted. But maybe we could build something new, a more mature relationship based on mutual respect and recognizing everyone's right to make their own decisions. I spent the next few days setting up the apartment and helping Dorothy in the garden. She told me about the upcoming City Harvest Festival and insisted that I participate, baking my famous apple pie for the fair. It's the best way to meet all the neighbors and feel part of the community, she assured me. And I agreed, thrilled at the thought of participating in the community again, without fear of running into Wendy or being manipulated. That evening, I sat in my chair with a cup of tea, looking at Henry's picture on the mantelpiece. His smile, captured years ago, seemed especially warm now, as if he approved of my decisions, my new path. "You'd be proud of me, wouldn't you?" I asked quietly. I'd finally done what you'd always said I'd do, taken my life into my own hands. I almost thought I could hear his answer, that special soft chuckle that came out of his mouth when I said something obvious. "Of course I'm proud, Irma," he would say. "I always knew you were stronger than you thought." It was getting dark outside the window, and the lights of Greenfield twinkled in the night like little beacons. My new life was just beginning, and for the first time in years, I looked to the future without fear, with hope and confidence. I was free from toxic relationships, from manipulation, from a sense of duty that forced me to sacrifice myself. Free to be myself, to live by my own rules, at my own pace, and that was the most valuable thing I had gained in the last few years.